Before we get started on the video, I would like to take a moment to say thanks to all my patrons, because I wouldn't be able to keep doing this without you, so thank you so much for all your support. I'd also like to say thanks to Richter and Scott for their tier 4 sub this month, and special thanks to James Bond for his tier 5 sub again this month. In this video we're going to add cooldowns to our spells. However, there's one little bug we need to fix first, and that's the fact that whenever you craft something, you can just switch to another item here before it's done crafting and craft that one instead. So let's see here if I can find my keybinds here. So you see we need 1 gold bar to craft the helmet, and we can start crafting the gold bar. And oh, we still need something there. We start crafting gold bar, and if we switch to the helmet before it's done, it will generate a helmet for us by using the materials for gold bar. Not even using any materials, as you can see, it just used, like, it created a awesome helmet for free. In this video you're going to learn how to add cooldowns to your spells. However, before we do that, there's a little bug we need to fix. As you can see, if we open up our what's it called, the profession tab, we can craft 2 things. We can craft gold bar and we can craft a helmet, and the helmet needs 1 gold bar and the gold bar needs 5 nuggets. We have 5 nuggets in our bag, and if I start crafting that and I switch to the helmet before it's done, it will craft the helmet and not use any materials. So that's a bit of a bug. So let's see what we can do to fix that. So we have to open up our scripts and find our profession, and then we have to find our profession script. And inside the profession script, we will have to go to the top first of all, because right now we are crafting whatever we have selected. So that means whenever we switch to another item, it will craft that. So we need to make a reference to the actual thing we are crafting. So let's do that. Let's see, let's do it here. So let's make a private item. That's the item we're going to craft. Private crafting material. So all the materials we need. Call it current materials. And yeah, I think that is it for there. And then we have to go all the way down to craft. Let's see if we can find that. There we go. So when we craft, we have to say item equals craft item info dot my item. So then we need to say current materials is the selected recipe dot materials. So now we make a reference. You can see we are not using whatever we have selected. We are making references to it, so that whenever what we have selected when we click the craft button is actually what we're going to craft. And then we have to add items to the inventory here. So we say, well, if the inventory add item, so instead of this craft item info, we're going to use item. And instead of selected recipe, we're going to use current materials and save. Let's see if that fixed the bug. And let's try to run it. So we have 6 bars, nuggets. So we start crafting, and I switch to the helmet and see what happens. And it generated a gold bar for us. So now we can craft the helmet and switch back, and it should craft the helmet. There we go, and use the gold bar. So that was a little bug we have fixed, and now we can move on to actually adding cooldowns to our spells. Okay, let's start to add some UI elements for showing the cooldowns. And the UI elements are just going to go on top of the bars here, or the buttons. So let's go to UI canvas, and let's say our action bar and action 1. So in here we are gonna open up the icon, and we already have the icon that shows, if we enable it, it would show a fireball. Basically we can just duplicate that and call it cooldown overlay. That's our cooldown overlay. And then we have the text to show the cooldown on top of it. I started this tutorial like 3 years ago, I think, more. And back then, TextMesh Pro wasn't a part of Unity. So that's why we're using this old text here. So if you want to update it to TextMesh Pro, you can just delete this, right click and say UI and implement TextMesh Pro. I'm pretty sure it's a part of the standard package now in Unity when you install it. Let's just take this and make it fit inside the button here. And then I'm gonna put the font size to, yeah, what did I write down? I put it down to 40. So let's say 40. And I'm going to use this Anton SDF, and I'm going to center my text, and then we can just write 0.00, for example. That's the time right now, or how much time is left on the cooldown. Okay, the cooldown overlay is not going to be a fireball. We're going to use something else. We are going to use an empty slot. So click here and say empty, and see we have the empty slot. Let's use that as an overlay. And then we're going to make it larger. So let's scale it up and scale it up so that it fits inside the other, what's called the other slot. And then I am going to take a color here. I'm going to make it a bit gray, like this. So you can see when it's on cooldown, it gets darker. And then I am going to set the alpha to 150. Let's do that, like that. And then I'll take the image type and put it as a field, radial 360, and the origin is going to be the top. And then I am going to just see if this works. Yeah, so it goes the wrong way, I think. So instead of going that way, we should reverse it. So remove this clockwise thing, tick. And what else? Let's see here. That looks pretty good now. So when the cooldown runs, it's going to go down like this. Anything else in here? I think that is basically a raycast target. We can remove that. We don't need to be able to click that thing. And then we just disable the image. And the text below it, we simply also, I think we also just disable that thing. There we go. We could also have it enabled and then just enable the cooldown like this. But okay, next thing we are going to do is to write some code. So let's open up our spell book. In here, we are going to create a new method, and I think I want to put it under my cast. And this method is going to be used as a coroutine. So we're going to add an enumerator as a return type and call it cast cooldown. This is going to run our cooldown, and we're going to add a iCastable as parameter. Okay, so the iCastable interface needs to have added a few things. We need to go through that. So right click and say go to definition. And here we need to add a bool called onCooldown. And get and set that, so we can check if it's on cooldown. And then we also need to make a float called myCooldown, so that we know how much cooldown this specific spell has. And that's it. So we save that, go back. And in here, we say castable dot on cooldown true. So when we start the cooldown, of course, it goes on cooldown, and then we yield return new wait for seconds. And how long are we going to wait? Well, we're going to wait the castable's cooldown. So if the castable has a cooldown of 1 second, it's going to wait for a second before it tells that this castable on cooldown is false. So now it's not on cooldown anymore, and we can use it again. Okay, this needs to be implemented. If we open the error list and build, I think it should tell us that we need to implement this. One failed. Let's see here. So all these doesn't implement the right methods. So right click on iCastable and say quick action, and we can implement the interface. And then we can see it shows on cooldown and my cooldown here. So on cooldown is simply just a bool, and we are not going to set it other places than in here. So actually I am going to make a property myself, property bool, and just take on cooldown here and paste it up there. So we have this little property. When you can copy that and go to recipe and basically put it in there as well. Doesn't really matter where you put it. And we also need my cooldown here. So right click, quick actions, implement it. And for now, we don't really need to return anything here. So actually we could also say property dot load my cooldown. And just return it right there like that, because right now we're not going to put cooldowns on recipes, but in some cases you might have cooldowns on. Let's say in most games, if a recipe has a cooldown, it's a long time, it's like a day or 6 hours or something, so that you can't just craft too many of that item. So let's just put it here for now, and we can use it if we want to, but we're not going to use it right now. So we go to spell, and here we have our on cooldown, and my cooldown here needs to be set. So let's go to the top and make this property. Let's make a private float called cooldown and serialize it. And I think let's put it up under the cast time, so the cast time and the cooldown is like right next to each other, right? So we have the cooldown here. I need to return it down here, so let's just do that. Get return. What's called cooldown. Oh wait, this is a new property, so we don't do like that. Let's just do it the easy way. Let's go up here and say cooldown, boom, boom, Control RE, and there we go. So it just made it for us, so we don't have to write ourselves. Instead of cooldown, we are going to call it my cooldown. So I'm going to rename it my cooldown, so we don't mix it up with the other one. So we have on cooldown and my cooldown now. Then we go back to the spellbook, and up here we say castable dot on cast done. So on cast done is something that is going to be called whenever the cast is done. It's going to start the cooldown. Actually, it's going to show the UI and countdown and such. And actually, let's just comment that out for a moment, because we need to test if this works first. So on cooldown is set now. It's set correctly. However, we need to call this somewhere. So this cast cooldown method needs to be called from somewhere in our script or our game. So we need to call two places. We need to call it in our spellbooks, what's called progress method we have here. Because right here, when we are in, let's see here, then we're done casting. And when we're done casting, we need to put it on cooldown. So if our castable dot my cooldown is more than 0. So if we have a cooldown that is larger than 0, which means we have a cooldown on this spell, then we say start coroutine cast cooldown castable. And there. So now we are starting the cooldown. Well, that's all very nice. However, we're not using the cooldown for anything. We're just putting it on cooldown without actually acknowledging that there is a cooldown, so, or testing if we have a cooldown. So how do we do that? Well, the easiest way to do that is just to put an if statement somewhere so that we can check if we're on cooldown before we cast. So let's find what method. Should we find cast spell method inside our player? Let's go there. Should be character related, and we have our player there. And if we go to our cast spell, search for it, there we go. We can say, well, we only want to do all this if our spell dot on cooldown is false. And then we basically take everything here and move it in there. So let's try this out. Let's try with a fireball or something. So we go to our UI, spellbook, just that Unity update. There we go. And we can take our fireball and say that our cooldown is, let's say 5 seconds. Then we can actually test it. In here at the fireball, if I go down here, select my skeleton and shoot, and then I switch, and I can't press. I'm spamming my button right now, and they're still on cooldown. And there we go. Now we can fire again. So now we have a cooldown for our spell. However, we need to indicate that cooldown somehow. And we can do that by taking advantage of our cooldown overlay and the text here. So we can indicate it. So let's get back to this oncast done. We commented out. Let's add it again. And right now we don't have it. So we need to open up our iCastable. Let's go to that. And in the bottom here, we can make a method called onCastDone. So this onCastDone method is going to be called and execute an event. So when the cast is done, the spell button will know that there's a cooldown and countdown and all those things. So basically, we need onCastDone to notify our spell button that it needs to show a cooldown. Okay, so now it's not showing anything here, but we still need to implement it somewhere. And where do we do that? Well, we need to write some code for calling an event, and we will do that inside the spell script. Inside the spell script, we will have to add an event that we can trigger. So let's go to all the way to the top here, and we can make a public delegate that returns nothing called done. Just for now, let's just call it done. We can also call it cast done or whatever, but we're just calling it done. Then we right click on iCastable and implement the interface. And we do the same inside our recipe, because it's also castable. And this also makes sure that we can trigger the recipe when it's done, if we want that later. Let's see here, there it is. Let's see, where did it go? I just want to remove this non-implemented exception so it doesn't stop the program if we do that. And then we go to our, what was the spell? All the way down here, and we find onCastDone here. And inside onCastDone, we will have to check if our cast done isn't null. And then we're going to go down here and say cast done.invoke. However, we haven't created this event yet. So we actually need to go to the top. It's easier for us. Let's do that and make a public event called done, or type done, and call it cast done. So this event is based on this delegate, which means we can go down here and say, well, if cast done isn't null, well, if it isn't null, then someone is listening to it and someone wants to do something if it triggers. Well, then we say cast done.invoke, and that's it. So now we are invoking this event whenever we are calling onCastDone. And where do we need to call onCastDone? Well, onCastDone needs to be called when the cast is done. So let's figure out where we should place that. Or I mean, we are already calling it. I forgot that. We are already calling it inside our spellbook here. So we're calling it here. However, the event needs to be bound to some method or some code. So let's find out what that is. The best place to do that would be inside our action button. So whenever we, what is it called? Set, let's say we take the fireball and put it on the button. When the moment that the fireball is put on the button, we should bound the event so that it knows that it needs to set that event when it's on that button. So inside set usable, go down here, and before we do the count, I think we can go inside the else here and say, well, if the usable is iCastable. Then we say usable as iCastable dot cast done. Okay, so we don't have the cast done inside our iCastable interface, so we need to do that. Let's go to the iCastable interface and put it up here. So event done, cast done. We go back, so we say our cast done event. Now we can see it. Well, what should that be bound to? It should be bound to a method that runs our cooldown. And what method could run our cooldown? Well, we just need to make a simple method here. Let's just do that right here. Public void run cooldown. And the reason that we're doing like this is because this method here is going to call coroutine. We can't really bind an event to the coroutine like that when we want to start it. So we're just going to bind the event when the event triggers, when the cast is done. It triggers this run cooldown method, and the run cooldown method will start a coroutine that shows all the fancy things like UI moving and so on. And just a little thing, we also need to remember the cooldown time. So let's just go up here. We need to make a private float called cooldown time. And it needs to be set down here so that we remember it, because when we cast the cooldown and everything, we don't have a reference to the spell. So the easiest way to get a reference to the cooldown time is just to make a field. You'll see in a moment. So we can just say cooldown time equals usable as iCastable dot my cooldown. And that's because when we run our run cooldown here, we need a reference to the actual iCastable we are using and the spell we are casting, but we might not have that at that point. So I just figured let's just make a field for now and see if that works out. Okay, so with that done, we also need to actually steal some code though, because we have what's called, we already did this in our spellbook. If we go to the progress enumerator, you see that we already have all the code for showing a time and moving something over time. Let's just take all this, the progress method from the spellbook. Let's cut that or copy it and move to our action button and paste it here. So, oh, actually not inside the other method, of course, just below it. And here we're going to start coroutine progress. See, there's an error because the progress is asking for a castable. Well, we don't really have that right here, and we don't want it. So because we already saved our cooldown time up here. So instead of passing in the iCastable and casting it and such, we simply just say, well, we don't need an iCastable right there. So instead of saying castable.myCastTime, we simply just say cooldown time. And then we have the casting bar and all the fill amounts. So this, of course, needs to be fixed so that it suits the what's called the structure of this new thing instead of the casting bar. So let's make a few fields here. Let's go to the top. And up here, we need to make a couple of fields. We need to make a private text GMP underscore text, I think it's called. Just right-clicking quick actions and using GMP Pro. So this is the text. We just call it text. I don't know. We can call it countdown. This is our countdown. And then we need the overlay. So let's make a private image called cooldown overlay. And serialize this one. And serialize this one. There we go. So now these two are serialized. Then we go down here. where all our errors are. And down there, we need to change stuff around. So the casting bar dot fill amount, first of all, here. Well, we don't need to set the casting bar dot fill amount. So let's just, instead of the casting bar, let's say cooldown overlay dot fill amount. And we don't loop from 0 to 1. We need to loop from 1 to 0. And why is that? Well, when we look at this and we enable all our stuff here, you'll see that we start from 1 and we go all the way down to 0 when the cooldown is over. We're not counting like this. That's why. Then we have our progress, that's fine. Time passed is fine. So then we have our cast time. It's going to be countdown. And we're going to use our cooldown time. String. And the cooldown time. And then we're going to use our countdown. Text. And we are then going to say if our cooldown time minus time passed is less than 0, then we say countdown text 0.00, and we say cooldown overlay dot enable false, and we say countdown dot enable false, and in top here we also need to say cooldown overlay dot fill amount is 1, so we start with 1, and we say countdown dot enable true, and cooldown overlay that enabled true. So now we can run our progress, I think. So we actually need to save this, jump back into Unity, make sure that we don't enable the text from the start, and we don't enable our image from the start, and then we say action button, and it needs to have a reference to those two things. So let's see here, I forgot to serialize them. Maybe we have the overlay, maybe I forgot to save. Oh, we have what's called compile errors. So stop casting does not exist. We don't need stop casting in here, that's for sure. And recipe, right click, quick actions, implement. Let's see here, where do we have that null reference? Don't, what was it we implemented? Something here. Oh, it's the done event. Okay, that's fine. Just keep that. And now we should be able to save. Jump out here. So now we have our text. So we take our text and drag it onto, oops, there. We take this one, drag onto there. And then we have our cooldown overlay. That's this one. Drag onto there. So basically you need to do the same things for action button 2 and 3, right? You need to make the cooldown overlay for both of them. We could just duplicate it actually. Duplicate that and move it to 2, and duplicate it and move it to 3. And then of course the positions needs to be fixed. This one needs to go all the way over here. Just X position needs to be 0. This one over here and X position 0. There we go. And then you select the action buttons and you take the overlay and move over, and the text over. And then you do the same thing for the other one. Overlay and text. There we go. Okay, I think we are ready to test if it works. So let's see, we have the fireball. Select here and fire at the skeleton. And you can see it counts down 5 seconds. And when it's over, it removes it. And you can change the color. For example, the text, I think it looks better if it's green, for example. Let's make it a green color like this. Maybe it's easier to read then. Let's try to maximize it so it's easier. And there you can see the cooldowns counting down. I can't cast until it's over again. Okay, so one thing here is the fact that it doesn't work with AoE spells for now. So if we actually earn our, or unlock our Rain of Fire, put it here. And of course we forgot to put a cooldown on it, so let's do that. Let's say our spellbook and find our Rain of Fire and say the cooldown would be, let's say 5 seconds again. Well, if we run this and unlock our Rain of Fire, we are still able to keep placing it without a cooldown. So how do we fix that? So what we have to do is to open up our player script. Inside the player script, we need to find the update method in the top. And here we are casting our AoE spell. So basically, to add a cooldown, we need to say start coroutine, spellbook, my instance, cast cooldown, and basically we need to make this a public method. So let's go to definition and make it public. This is inside the spellbook. We have this enumerator cast cooldown, and well, then we are going to give it the AoE spell, and that should be it. DWN. There we go. So this should add the cooldown. Let's try to save and see what happens when we use an AoE spell now. Let's just get the spell real quick here. There we go. And if I place this, you'll see that's on cooldown. I can't click it anymore. Spamming it here. And when the cooldown is over, I can place another one. So there you have it. So now we have cooldowns on our AoE spells, and we also have cooldowns on our normal spells if we want to. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.